say thank you, first of all, for inviting me to come and present. This is a basically a rerun of a presentation I gave a few weeks ago for the American Water Works, AWWA, Association of Water People.
Yeah, that was in the New Mexico Water Committee, little section within Rocky Mountain section of AWWA. And,
Yeah.
At any rate, now
So,
I can understand what was you were trying to present a couple months ago. Hopefully.
Sometimes it's a lot to go through, and I will try to go at a reasonable pace. And if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as we get going a little bit further. So I'm a hydrogeologist by training and career, and I am not a data specialist by any means, but I have, in the last couple of years, taken on the challenge of putting together New Mexico's water data, working with a number of state agencies. So I'm going to talk through some of that, but I'm coming to you from Socorro, New Mexico. I'm at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology down at New Mexico Tech, and I've been working in that realm for the last almost 17 years now. So to advance the slide. So I'll talk today about the legislation that passed in 2019 called the Water Data Act, and it was listed under House Bill 651, and there's a little link at the bottom of the screen, which I can share slides with you later if you want to explore and look at the legislation in detail and all of the iterations that are available in the process it went through to become law. But basically, I'll talk through today about why we have this legislation, how did we get to this place in New Mexico, and then how we're actually working to implement this new policy. I still consider it new because it's only 2 years, and 2020 didn't really count, right? So what this legislation actually says is that 5 state agencies, as well as other collaborators, are specifically asked to share, integrate, and manage water data toward an effort for improved water management and water planning. The convener agency of this legislation is the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, where I am, and other agencies involved are the Interstate Stream Commission, the Office of the State Engineer, the Environment Department, and Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. And each of these agencies have some piece of water data. With the Interstate Stream Commission, a lot of their emphasis is on the compact arrangements between our sister state, neighboring states, and making sure that we deliver what is promised in compact for various rivers. The Office of the State Engineer is charged with maintaining water rights and the different water uses and tracking that for the state of New Mexico, as well as other things, but that's kind of the big water data part. The Environment Department is charged with kind of maintaining the water quality, both drinking water quality, groundwater protection, some streams and rivers. And Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources has a division, which many of you in this group are familiar with, the Oil Conservation Division, which oversees the oil and gas industry and maintains data on the produced water as well as injection wells to some extent. So all of them have some data. The legislation actually also asks that we collaborate with regional efforts as well as national efforts. So these are the ones that are technically required to participate, but there's hopefully I can mention it toward the end. Some of the successes we've had are actually with some of the smaller data providers. So just to kind of start us off, I wanted to talk a little bit about why the need for a Water Data Act in New Mexico. And I think these 2 images on the screen kind of tell the story about why we need that. For one, we're seeing increasing annual average temperatures here in New Mexico. We've already seen a rise in annual temperature of about 2 degrees C since the 1980s. and that continues to climb from year to year on average. And then when we look at the drought monitor, this is the most current one available, and you can see that we're pretty much in some form of drought. And from year to year, this varies obviously, but we really face a lot of drought challenges here in the Southwest, and having ready access to data to describe our water resources and help us kind of implement changes and use different tools to address these drought challenges seems to be really important. I was looking for a slide that I had presented some years ago that actually looks at the trend of drought conditions over time and how the interest in brackish water and reuse of alternative water resources kind of goes up. Every year that this map turns bright red and dark orange, we see an increase in interest in kind of the desal sort of effort. And so I think that's just an interesting little observation I'm going to admit somebody in. So to bring into the conversation is just to think about how drought years really challenge our water supplies and help us to recognize the need for ready access to water data. So on top of the fact that just kind of the basic need for ready access to data, we are also seeing that there is an increasing number of data features coming available and being collected around the state and the country and really the globe. And so this is just a little schematic from a group called Statista that just basically gets to the point that we're seeing an exponential rise in just the number of data points coming available since about 2010. So there's more and more data becoming available, number of new sensors being developed that can track and collect data, and the number of groups out there collecting data is also a wide range of groups. And so the problem comes back down to the fact that there's really no systematic way to combine that data, to collect that data, to put it together. So individuals, agencies, various people who need water data can spend quite a lot of time trying to track down data from all over the place without some sort of systematic approach. And here in New Mexico, I don't think we're alone in this. I think our colleague here from Oklahoma can perhaps relate to this, but we have many different agencies with different, we'll call them vintage, lovingly call them vintage data systems, some of which are more than 20-year-old databases that house our water data. And they are in all different formats and different states of readiness for sharing. And I think the mental picture that we've been thinking about for this water data initiative is that it's like we have a bunch of islands that are individual data agencies or data providers that are not connected in any way. And so we're looking at ways to connect the communities in those islands. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we're doing this, but really what we're hoping to do is, rather than build bridges that physically connect all of those data features, we're actually hoping to build airports and do it in a very futuristic, modern way. There are some challenges with building those airports at each of these agencies, but leave it to say that we have data in old formats, even paper records, as well as old databases and even some new databases that basically at this point aren't all talking to each other. And to the average user on the outside, I think that many of us have experienced this, where we have a question about what is the water condition in my area, or how is the river in my area safe for my dog to go swimming in, or is the water in this town safe to drink? and I think normal person doesn't necessarily know where to look or how to get to that data. And so in this example, I just wanted to make the point that there are all these different agencies with different kinds of data, and we have to really have the tenacity to ferret out that data and know, first of all, who to go to get the data that we're looking for. So it requires some expertise first to find the data you're looking for, but then also how to use that, how to download that. Some of these interactive maps have features that make it really easy. And other web interfaces are kind of more for like one-by-one data review and online platforms, but not actually downloading data. So we have a variety of places where people can right now go, and the data are already public. They're just not necessarily interoperable or accessible for multiple users. So this is just a point to make that in many cases, the federal agencies, the USGS especially, are moving ahead with very open data platforms and technologies. That has been a big push since about 2007. But when it comes down to the state level, we see very little support toward this, and not a whole lot of infrastructure or funding going into this realm of water data for state agencies. Oh, sorry, I have to admit somebody. I'll try to stay focused on two things at the same time. So the article here on the right is a 2016 article by Charles Fishman, and just kind of make the point and emphasize the need to move ahead with in the water realm especially, to really put resources and time and energy into modernize our data systems. So there's a lot of technology out there. It's been applied in the health industry and kind of that realm, and in the business sector, and in a lot of app development. But the water sector, for many reasons, but it continues to kind of lag behind. And so New Mexico is facing that challenge head on, and we'll continue to talk through how we're doing that. Okay, so New Mexico adopted this legislation in 2019, and that basically made New Mexico the second state in the country to have a statute on the books that says that we will have open water data. And I think I'll talk to you about a little bit about how that came to be, and really I think the underlying message of how that came to be is an effort of collaboration, both listening, hearing what the needs are in the water community, as well as stepping up to collaborate with multiple players to make this happen. And so going back to 2016, the first state in the country to adopt this legislation was California. They have a very comprehensive, open and transparent Water Data Act, and that is here as Assembly Bill 1755, if you're interested in reading through some of that. So that kind of set the groundwork for idea that could happen perhaps in New Mexico. Into 2017, I have kind of two things on here. One is that this idea of an Internet of Water was born out of a collaboration with the Aspen Institute, where they really identified a bunch of big issues around water and this kind of lagging behind in the state realm for water data. And so a piece came out in 2017 that kind of outlined this concept of an Internet of Water. And around that time, many of you perhaps were involved in the New Mexico First Town Hall that was related to state water planning. And that was in December of 2017. And I bring this up because it was really, I think, integral to a couple of reasons for me. But also, I think for the state, just recognizing one of the big issues that kind of bubbled to the surface in this conversation with New Mexico First was the it was echoed in every breakout room was the need for better access to water data. There was one room specifically focused on water data, and that was actually where I first met Representative Melanie Stansbury, who at that time was just moving back to New Mexico and had been in DC for the previous 8 or so years. And I think was a little surprised to find the state of New Mexico's water data in a very similar state as where she left it in the years before. So she came into that conversation in this New Mexico First Town Hall and kind of threw out some ideas, very bold ideas, I will say, on the water situation, and in particular with water data in New Mexico. So rolling into 2018, at the WRI annual conference in New Mexico at NMSU that year, we had a kind of a work session after the annual conference where we talked through some ideas about water data and some of the challenges that New Mexico faces, and who has data and how would they share it, and what are some opportunities out there to start thinking through that. Around that time also, I think, was when Melanie Stansbury began running for state office. And also at that time was when New Mexico adopted the state water plan, the 2018 state water plan. There were 8 major policy pieces in that water plan, and one of those was my internet. Ooh, came back. Hopefully you can all still hear me, but maybe I shouldn't be the host. I'm gonna keep going because I still see a little bit of movement. Okay, so 2018 happened. As we roll into 2019, Representative Stansbury has now been elected for House District 28 in Albuquerque, and she presented at another water conference, the New Mexico Water Dialogue Conference, in January of that year, and suggested some big ideas for how policy could perhaps move around water data. And so, okay, so after that conference, this is the fun part, which I often gloss over, but for you guys, I'm going to dig into it a little bit. But after that conference, we went out to Bow and Arrow Brewery and had a conversation afterwards, and basically kind of said, you know, there's all these things happening around the need for water data. Perhaps it's time to adopt or try to see if we can push forward some legislation on water data. And so that was basically when the idea of the formal idea of putting together legislation for water data was born, working with Representative Stansbury. And for all of you who are in the Albuquerque area who haven't gotten out to vote for that Congressional District 1, I am not in there. I encourage you to go out and vote while I try to change slides here. Okay, so the 2019 legislative session starts up, and we put together a draft of this legislation, and to our surprise and very happy surprise, we were just bombarded by support with this. It's really impressive to see how many collaborators in New Mexico found value in having ready access to water data, including support from the New Mexico Desalination Association, as well as just a whole slew of every end of the spectrum here represented in terms of support for this legislation. The legislation was sponsored by Representative Stansbury, as well as Representative Gail Armstrong, who is our state rep here in the Socorro area. And I think she had recognized the need for ready access to water data in this region in particular because of the San Augustine Plains water challenges that were happening around that time. So in some of the presentations I've given, it's been, people are really curious about why did New Mexico adopt this, and what were some of the reasons for the success of it. And I think it was in part just the stars aligning, and that, you know, we've had a few years of conversations about water data and a state water plan that highlighted the need, and California had just done it. So everybody kind of said, well, if they can do it, so can we. And as well as just a real big need for ready access to that. And the state agencies also were behind that. And so that starts us off in 2019 with legislation that basically firmed up this team of people who shall work together. We established a governance structure that includes an implementation team, as well as directing agencies, so representatives from each of those 5 agencies, as well as a few other agencies, a technical working group, a data users working group, and an executive steering committee, which meets only once a year or so. So we jump in 2019, and the main efforts of this legislation are listed here in these 5 bullet points. So what we're really after is to first of all identify the key data and any tools needed to improve water management and planning. We're also asked in the legislation to inventory the water data and assess some of those data gaps. We are asked to develop data standards and definitions. That's largely led by the technical working group that I just mentioned. Build an integrated data service that has all of our key data, a data catalog, and some basic tools. And then periodically report on these efforts and maintain a plan for how to engage in this going forward. And so we did a plan in April of 2020. According to the legislation, that was our deadline. And then we have coming up this year by September of 2021, our next iteration of that plan. So the data that we're talking about here is fairly comprehensive. It's everything from water quantity to water quality and to the various uses of water in the state. And the overall vision of this is mainly just to make the water data accessible and actually useful for water management and planning purposes. And that those water management and planning can be from anywhere from the average person to the state agency or some executive branch person who needs to make some decisions about water. So quite a broad vision. So I think this is where things get a little surprising because there's very little funding for this effort. And as you can probably tell from some of the things I've listed off, this is no small endeavor. We have basically $100,000. That's a variable number depending on which way the cuts or increases to the state contribution to New Mexico Tech go, but around $100,000 in state funding. We've been able to add to that some philanthropic contributions from the Healy Foundation. And then a year ago, we entered into a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for a Water Smart grant. And that brings in, basically leverages that $100,000 of state funding with an additional per year, $100,000 up to $300,000 for a project in the Pecos Valley along the Pecos River and working in collaboration with the Pecos Valley Artesian Conservancy District. So the legislation specifically says that there will be a water data account at New Mexico Tech where I work. And so we can add in other contributions through that. And one, I think, big thing that's important to know about this is that it is not funded to the state agencies that have to participate in this. And I think that there are a number of pieces of legislation that have come into play in the last few years that basically ask the state agencies to step up and do something more or different from what they're currently doing, and have very little funding to actually support that. So some of the challenges that we're currently working through about how they share their data to us comes back to this point. So as I mentioned, in April of 2020, we put together a plan, a lot of help from your Jerry Sullivan Graham on this. And so we had some pretty big goals in this. I won't go into it, but just to say that we're working on an update for September of this year. A lot of this information can be found on our website at newmexicowaterdata.org. And this plan itself is listed under the resources tab. We have a water data catalog established, and that is built in a platform called CCAN. It's an open source tool, and it's sitting on a Google Cloud service. And what's nice about this is that agencies who wish to, and kind of going back to that comment I made at the beginning, some of our smaller local entity collaborators are able to actively participate in sharing their data through this. So basically, this is a catalog where we set up an agency, and the agency themselves can put up any data set that they feel is ready for public consumption. And so a lot of them right now are basically just pointing to agency web pages. And as we move forward through this kind of improved organization, I think more of these will be more direct to the data sources themselves. But this is a first step for kind of inventorying, seeing where we have data, seeing what that data looks like, and giving us a place to start the conversation to just get people participating in actively sharing their data. And so I think that's a good place to start with. And then as we move forward with, particularly with the directing agencies, what we're really asking them to do is completely change how we share our data. So many of us are familiar with basically a web interface or an interactive map where you can go and view and kind of click on points and access data and make a little hydrograph on the side that's built out of that platform. What we're trying to do is fundamentally a little different. We're trying to make the data available also in a machine readable format and in a way that computers can work with, and then those additional tools can come to follow. So that it's not only shared in this human readable format, but also shared in this machine readable format. And so we're not asking agencies to put together data that, you know, isn't meant for public, that has somebody's phone number or tax ID number. We're not asking for any of that. What we're just trying to get to is the data that they're already making public and share it when they're ready. And then the next step is to put it out in a more modern, dynamic way. And by that, we mean an API. And an API in this context is an application programming interface, not the oil and gas API. So these APIs are basically a web service language that the computers can work with and grab lots of data. And there's a lot of open source tools that we're starting to use to make that available. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve. We're finding that has made it challenging to leap into this. We're working through that right now. But basically, as these APIs are established, again, we're building these on 20-year-old data systems in some cases. But as these APIs are established, we can then integrate multiple data sources so that we have all of the water quality data from the Environment Department, from the OCD at MNERD, from a little bit of water quality data that the ISC has, plus the water quality data that's hosted by a citizen science group and a university. All can come together into one interface that is transformed and made into a comparable data set. So we're all talking calcium in the same units at the same time, or whatever the feature is that we're looking at. And So the idea is that when we kind of take a step back and work on this in the back end, making the computer version, the machine readable version of the data, we can then make it more easy to access on the front end, and build a variety of tools, those map interfaces, some of the different kind of graphics that people want to look at to see changes over time. That is far easier to work with, and also to implement these data streams in the kind of modeling applications as well. And one thing I wanted to just loop back on is that we've selected this particular API format. It's called Sensor Things. It's produced from the Open Geospatial Consortium's. It's a global review of a variety of different data formats, but they have their approved version for time series and location-based data. It's called Sensor Things. And so we've selected that as our data format. And it works really well for a lot of the data that we have at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, for example, as well as a number of features, I think, at the Environment Department. And we were kind of pointed onto this by the Internet of Water. So we're working through that. And then interestingly, and I think this is one of those points where New Mexico can really shine, being such a small state, we're able to quickly move through some of this. And the USGS was working on improving their API endpoints and basically said, oh, hey, let's do that too. New Mexico is actually a leader in this platform and in this space now. And so it's cool to see that they're now adopting the Sensor Things API format, which means that as we move our data into this realm and into this format, and the agencies eventually host their data that way as well, it'll just make it all that much easier to integrate and work with other federal data sets, particularly at the USGS. And so I think the kind of underlying theme of what all this is points back to this acronym FAIR, making the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so basically from the point of where the different agencies are collecting the data, how they maintain their data, and then how they host and share that out is along this line of FAIR. And really what it looks like when it's coming out in this more modern API format is it's computer readable, it's machine readable. It's not something that you and I want to necessarily spend a lot of time staring at. But you can see here, this is basically that Sensor Things API format on the screen. And so computers can very quickly go and access the data needed to answer specific questions. And there's been some really interesting conversations like, okay, we'll put all this data up and then what? Who's going to use it and why will they care? And I think that there are a number of instances where in the data realm, if you build it, they will come. There's this report that many of you probably saw, the World Resources Institute, where they kind of highlighted the water stress around the whole planet, but really looking at the US version, you can see that New Mexico came up as extremely high risk for water stress going forward. And this kind of mapping exercise can be far better informed with more ready access to water data. And we've already been able to participate in some data challenges. We worked with the California Water Data Challenge and got some young bright minds working on our New Mexico water data, and they did some work to explore kind of the impacts of the Clean Water Act rule changes on streams and the kind of potential impact that might have on groundwater and other resources. So there's a little bit of information about those team exercises that came out of that product. So I think the point here is just to say that there's a lot that can be done that we haven't even begun to imagine here in New Mexico, that as we open up our water data, some new minds and new research techniques can begin to be applied to that. And I think it's important to note, as I alluded to earlier, each of the state agencies, while they do not necessarily have funding to participate or to hire staff to make some of this available, they are actively finding their way through this and working to make their data available. And so I think it's important to kind of give this some patience and understand that we think that this is going to be like, here's how we get from point A to point B. It's this very straight line, but in fact, we'll have to find our way through some different challenges and bumps in the road. And so we are all getting there. And if you have questions, I can talk a little bit more about how each agency is working through this. But I think I'll proceed. One of the things I wanted to just real quickly mention is that project that we have some funding from the Bureau of Reclamation in the Pecos region. In this area, the idea here is to kind of focus our lens on a particular region and try to answer some questions that they have about water management and some of the challenges that they're facing with ready access to data. So making sure that water moves through the PVACD region down to the Carlsbad Irrigation District, making sure that groundwater pumping perhaps doesn't impact surface water, or water quality changes are not impacted by pumping or other water uses around the area. And so we're working with a number of collaborators in this area right now, working right now with PVACD to improve some of their data sharing practices and data management. And I think this summer we'll be coming out with some stakeholder engagement where we're trying to figure out, who wants to use this data and how do they want to find it. So if any of you have contacts in this general region who are interested in water data, let me know and I can make sure to include them in that survey. But this is, again, another collaboration with that group, Internet of Water, which I don't think I mentioned, but it's out of Duke University, and it is free to New Mexico to have their collaboration. So it's been great to have them as a resource. So getting to the end here, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we face in working with water data. And this is an image that was pointed out to me from Barb Horn, who's recently retired working with the Colorado Water Quality Monitoring Council. And I think that, this is like the Harry Potter movie where you have the three-headed dog. And here we are, just the average person wanting to figure out, well, what do I need to know about water in the state? And the three heads of this dog are the big challenges that we're working with. One is that willpower, that we are asking these agencies, these data providers, to really change how they manage water and to do things differently. And so, as you all know, change is hard. No one wants to, be different from what they're currently doing. What they're doing now is working okay. Why should we change it? So we're definitely pushing a cultural shift in how we manage our data and how we share our data fundamentally. There are major technical challenges. Like I said, the staff at these agencies haven't necessarily been trained in these more modern data sharing practices. Especially some of the more senior members, this is how they've always done it. They've always put it up in this way. And now we're asking them to do it in a completely different way. So the skill sets in some of the agencies needs a little more training to get to where we're asking them to be. Some of the data itself is technically lacking in the metadata that we would like to see, so that these APIs are functional. and really just having the communication skills, having the terminology and knowing what we're talking about, that has also been a technical barrier. And then really that biggest one, the ugliest dog head on this is perhaps the financial one, where we're seeing that the state agencies that we're asking to collaborate here are understaffed and underfunded for doing these kinds of extra work exercises. The morale is low in many instances. And so this financial piece is fundamentally where a lot of those problems come back to. And they need new data systems. So that is not cheap to kind of move out of that 20+ year old data system. However, to have a slightly more positive note here, I think there are some real advantages here in New Mexico that we can embrace on this water data challenge. Basically having a small population, while it's a huge state, we have just a few people we have to work with, we can be really efficient with the relationships and the communications and how we share this data. These drought issues and climate change actually light the fire under our feet to get this going and to make this as efficient as possible. And I think the fact that we have legislation, thanks to the initiative from Representative Stansbury and the support from a number of other legislators to get this across the finish line in 2019, I think that really keeps us on the near front burner for something that needs to get done. And I'm certainly not going anywhere, so we'll keep at it. Lessons learned, we've been in our technical working group and in some of our implementation team meetings, we're like, man, we just need one person who can help us with this amazing, next step, whatever that's going to be, and keep talking about it as if there's some magical person who knows all the data, who knows all the agencies, who knows how the people work, who knows the politics of New Mexico. Oh, and how to write code in Python and R. There are no unicorns, and yet we're able to piece some of these unicorns together. There's a lot of talent here in New Mexico, and we've been able to kind of piece together with our limited budget the right skill set, I think, to address this challenge. Again, agencies need some funding to be able to step up and play this game correctly and to share the data in these more modern formats. I think it's important that we have that base funding at the Bureau of Geology so that we can at least keep going on this effort, build some of the infrastructure that is needed to integrate these data. The community of support, I have just been so impressed with. The Internet of Water is a big one, but also some of the other surrounding states who have been through a little bit more data management processes have been really supportive and open about sharing their work and what they've done and successes that have worked for them. And so that's been really helpful to me. I think it's important to note that as I started, I'm a hydrogeologist, and in fact, this isn't even a data project. This is really what this boils down to, is knowing who's who and how their data challenges, what are they facing, and how can we improve some of this by making the data more available. So it's really just a people project, and continuing those conversations and making sure everybody's on the same page and communicating clearly. And we have a lot of small successes. One of the most recent ones I just wanted to mention is that the city of Albuquerque, they have a good number of points that they measure through their monitoring program around the landfills. And they basically have this database. They had some limitations with it. They figured out a way that they can have an automated email come out of their database, come to our data center, and then we convert it into that Sensor Things API, and now it's ready to go, machine readable. And so they're seeing the benefit. And I think we'll continue to see greater benefits of sharing that data and making it interoperable so that those sites can be worked together with other USGS monitoring sites, with things that the Water Authority is doing, with data features that AMAFCA are collecting. All of this can start to be visualized in one interface through these machine readable data places, APIs. So just a quick acknowledgement of a huge number of collaborators on this project, many of them by volunteer. And I really wouldn't be doing any of this without many of their support and people that they contribute. And again, you can find more information about this on newmexicowaterdata.org. We are just about to do some major revisions to the website. So if you go there this week, check back again in a month and it'll probably look different. And so I just wanted to close with this, which is that, there's a lot of things that can be done here. And I know many of you have people that you work with that are interested in water data or who have some water data. let me know if you have that data and would like to figure out how to host that on our data catalog. We also really need help building some of these resources, both for the initiative of putting this together, but also for the state agencies and advocating for them to be able to participate. And if you have, some piece of that unicorn that you think might be helpful, feel free to reach out to me and let me know, and we can get some of your skills playing in this mix. So I think that is the last slide. And I will, Charlie, I think I muted you. I'm sorry. If you want to unmute, or whoever's leading the meeting now.
Well, thank you, Stacy. Before we get on with the regular business, call for questions for Stacy. While we have the opportunity to avail ourselves of her expertise, I'm going to give this thing a thumbs up. Certainly very useful, very handy. Any questions from the membership on?
Charlie, I've got a couple for Stacy. Thank you. That was a great presentation. It's Bob Feinberg. Is any of this measurement going to be of brackish water?
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I'm trying to stop the sharing. I know we've talked about this, Bob, in the past, and so we are not collecting new data, and that's somewhat problematic, but I would just say that yes, the brackish water is definitely within the realm of this project, especially if it's being hosted already through either the work that we've done at the Bureau of Geology, which we have done some on brackish water, but there's also, the data hosted at the USGS, which characterizes some of those more saline aquifers. There's work, produced water data as that. There are some limitations in that water quality realm, is my understanding. We're trying to get access to that. So if you have any hot tips on data sources that relate to brackish water and who might be holding that, feel free to let me know. But yeah, that's absolutely in the realm of what this legislation asks us to do.
I think everybody on this call is probably more familiar with those sources than I would be. I'm a little bit worried about the funding.
Oh yeah.
Because by the time you get the money you need, there will be nothing to measure. It's going to be all gone. And so is there some unique possibility of, if this water that you find and measure, if it is able to turn into a profit for someone somewhere down the line, obviously the profit for the people of New Mexico is be able to have access to good, clean water, but there'll be water companies or water entities developed maybe around new sources or existing sources. And I'm trying to figure out in my, trying to be entrepreneurial mind, if we could get the funding for this raised through opportunity zones, at least where the measurements of water would lie within what's designated as opportunity zones. And most of New Mexico is an opportunity zone. So if we could look at it totally different as a very entrepreneurial track of, okay, we've got a lot of water in New Mexico that we need to determine where it is and how much there is of it, because ultimately we're going to turn it into human use, right? For human use, the betterment. And nobody's going to get it for free. So there's going to be a business situation in the middle of the find and the human use. That's going to be a product of some sort of pumping and filtering and distributing. And that is a business. And I know I'm thinking, you can shut me up anytime, but I know that I'm thinking real out of the box here, but I think we need to start doing that in the state. Or, you know, it's just, we're gonna have that mediocrity that we're so good at make us go thirsty. We're just gonna wake up one day and go, oh, what happened? And I'm just throwing that out there. Nobody has to comment and say how crazy that sounds, but just the food for thought. And then my other dumb non-engineer question is, at what point do we stop calling brackish water brackish and start calling it a wet mineral?
A wet mineral.
Yes, because I'm going to leave something, I'm going to throw something out here that we are working on. And quite frankly, D'Antonio kind of likes it. But since it's somewhat difficult to get special permits and everybody has a little touchiness about the brackish water, what do you think about this, Miss Hydrologist woman? What do you think about we mine this wet mineral for the mineral of it, and the byproduct becomes potable water? And we go after mineral rights as opposed to water rights or draining down the natural fresh water. There's one for the holiday weekend.
An interesting one. Yeah. I've heard that conversation for years. And
I think I'm going to take credit for that. I asked Dave Martin about it a long time ago, and he liked it a lot. So one other question, since there's a few of us, Melanie Stansberry, is she a good water person? I don't know anything about her except that she's running against this other guy.
Yeah, she's
and
a
now
good
that now that I'm an independent.
Yeah, she actually knows her stuff on water. She's the one, like, I did not know what an API was until I talked to Melanie Stansberry. This was a lot of her brainchild, and I think, yeah, she absolutely knows water and a number of other policy issues better than
most. Okay, sorry for taking so much time, but I had to get that out.
Bob, she was the water policy expert on the Senate Energy Committee for a couple of years before she came back here. So yes, she's got the credentials.
She knows her stuff. Okay, that's great to know. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last questions for Stacy.
There's one in the chat from Keith.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Stacy, if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Greg.
Yeah, Stacy, on the quality data, how far did you go into new data like PFAS data and contaminants of emerging concern, things that are just come on in the last couple of years and only are being picked up in a few spots?
Yeah, so my kind of response to that would be, I believe so a lot of that data is coming out from the USGS actually, and it's definitely within the realm of possibilities for something that we could integrate or share. So at this point, in terms of water quality features, we're building the pipelines to many of these features, and yet we're not at that point of creating like this handy map tool that will integrate PFAS data with salinity data and help us see where we have some kind of overlap. So my understanding is that there's been a bunch of new work here in New Mexico with that data that's just now coming online at the USGS and also at the Environment Department. And yeah, we're happy to point to that and start building maps. And with this group, I think I would love to hear over time, the kinds of questions and challenges that you guys are dealing with, and the kind of like, how do you want to find the data, and what kind of, are you trying to understand if there's PFAS in my drinking water, or is there PFAS, in this, is there something I need to worry about, a tool, or what questions are very relevant? Because once we hear those kind of use cases, then we can kind of point the spotlight on those data features and make sure that they're coming in through the APIs in the sensor things format, that then we can make those tools readily available. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Yeah, PFAS. Oh,
Stacy, there's a question from Keith Julian in the chat.
yeah. Will funding to support statewide water data collection and management be available from the Biden administration's infrastructure initiative? Personally, I think that water data infrastructure is directly aligned with what that infrastructure concept is about. We really are way behind. We're like horse and buggy, not even on a dirt road in some of these instances for water data. So we need to build the airports. Let's forget the roads. Let's just jump over to airplanes. And we can do that like without that much big lifting, honestly. So yes, I think there could be, and we're exploring that. One of the kind of new up and coming things happening at New Mexico Tech is perhaps the development of a hydrology center with some philanthropic large donor contributions, and that infrastructure piece is exactly what we're thinking about. So it relates to water data, and it relates to water research. It probably relates to brackish water and some of our deep water resources. And I can come back and talk to you more on that once we have a little bit more firm plans for that. But yeah, I think the infrastructure, this definitely is a need. I'm curious to know how we can plug into that, though, if you guys have tips for that.
Stacy, this is Keith. I guess the reason I'm asking that question is there will be likely, if the infrastructure bill passes, opportunities through multiple agencies, USGS, Reclamation, etc., to obtain funding. Is that something that you have plans for in this coming fiscal year?
As those RFPs or whatever proposals come out, yeah, it's with our partial unicorn team, we'll write some proposals to get that funding for sure. And what I'd really like to see, you know, for the initiative, there's only so much we can do without the full engagement and participation at the state agency level. So helping them to apply for that funding, or helping them to connect to whatever state resources that need a cost match for those federal resources, I think that would be a huge kind of next step for New Mexico. That makes sense.
Well, being the engineer in the group, you know, question of what kind of data would our organization like to see, specifically data, how salty and how deep and how much is in the ground.
Okay. I'll how salty, how deep, and how much is there?
And any other, you know, quality data on that goes along with how salty.
Mm-hmm.
Be very helpful, because sometimes in doing desalinization, it's not the calcium and the magnesium and the sodium that's the problem. It's what's called the sparingly soluble salts that make the application challenging. So Bruce, did I get that right? Any other thoughts on that as a practicing engineer?
You got it.
Very good. Very good. Well, once again, thank you, Stacy. One of these days, we're going to be back in person, maybe as soon as July. We're going to roll the dice. How many folks in this meeting have been vaccinated? Yes, sir, that's me, fully vaccinated. Maybe once again, in person is appropriate, something to think about. But in the meantime, in the absence of being able to applaud, we got these nifty little reactions we can all click and signify our deep appreciation for you taking time out of your day, Stacy, to come give us this update on the state's water data initiative. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much.